Welcome to What If Naruto Had Family Left Part 4. Link to fanfic in the description. Hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you do, please like the video and subscribe to my channel for more content. Spirals Hidden in the Leaves by Mr. Spinner. Chapter 7. Over the next 2 weeks the Team Talk was relegated to D ranks. Life for the Uzumakis developed something of a pattern. After dropping Naruto off at the academy, Ken would meet his team for training, both to hone their skills and to learn how to cooperate with each other's abilities. Then they'd take a few D ranks. Ken would pick Naruto up, they'd train until they couldn't stand, talk about their day as they ate dinner, meditate and go to sleep, then rise and repeat the next day. The only hiccup in that routine had been the Hokage's pronouncement of the dissolution of the Nine Tails secrecy law. Ken had held Naruto close to him as they stood at the front of the crowd, and Lord Hiruzen had delivered not only the news, but his assurance as the fabled professor and god of shinobi that Naruto was his own person and not the fox. Along with his vast disappointment in the people of the village for how they had treated Naruto all these years. He'd cut it short after that to prevent any allegations of favoritism, but the damage was done. Naruto's peers now knew the truth. Ken was relieved to hear that Naruto was not rejected in his class, at least no more so than usual. He'd acquired quite a reputation as a troublemaker over the years, and even then it would take time for the students to open up to the idea that Naruto wasn't dangerous, as their parents had said. But the word of the Hokage, backed up by Iruka on a more personal level, seemed to ease their minds. Iruka himself had been kind enough to inform him of that. It was early in this time that Lord Hiruzen had also issued the promised blood and chakra tests for his council's sakes. The redhead had been less than pleased, but he could understand the risk of a false Uzumaki running around the village and had participated without complaint. As expected, the results were positive, matched against the records of the legendary Mito Uzumaki and Naruto's mother Kushina. The event had, as a side effect, also left Ken with a distaste for the faceless Danzo Shimura who had apparently spearheaded the tests. In addition, Ken was given materials to study for a citizenship test, which he passed by the skin of his teeth. It was lucky that the history of Uzushiogakure so clearly mirrored that of Konoha, or else he would likely have failed. The pattern was only truly broken by the Hokage's latest pronouncement for Team Talk. AC rank, they chorused in surprise. Aoba seemed thrilled, even if he quickly retreated to his stoic facade, while Tomoko was more subtly pleased and Ken was just stunned. Indeed, AC rank. I believe the three of you are ready to handle such a thing. He passed the mission scroll to Tomoko, who, after a glance for permission to her uncle and a nod granting it, opened the assignment. We'll be escorting a trio of caravans, and the merchants who own them, from Tanzaku town to the Land of Cliffs, where we'll rendezvous with Takigakure ninjas who will take them the rest of the way home. Given that it's AC rank, I assume there's no reasonable chance of shinobi involvement, Aoba noted. That is the assumption of the merchants, Hiruzen confirmed. But, as they say, it is wise to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And we are considered preparation for the worst? Ken asked. Hiruzen smiled. I have faith in the three of you to handle this. Besides, it will allow each of you to work outside the village. At any rate, you have your assignment. Take no more than an hour to prepare and you will have time for a relaxed pace toward Tanzaku town. You'll be leaving with the caravan at dawn tomorrow. The team leader will be decided among yourselves. You are dismissed. With a respectful bow, the trio left the Hokage's office. But as they left the tower, Ken was hurriedly trying to come up with a solution to the problem it presented. An escort mission like this would take several days at the least, so what would he do with Naruto in the meantime? With these thoughts in his head, he couldn't help but glance at the Hokage Tower's adjacent building, the Academy. Very few people seemed to be able to tolerate Naruto. In fact, the only one that came to mind was, Ken stopped in his tracks as the best and only idea he had slowly unfolded. Meet at the West Gate in a half hour, Tomoko was saying. Right. West Gate in a half hour, Ken confirmed. With that, he rushed into the Academy building. Now then, class, we'll be continuing our lesson on the 5 great nations, starting on the land of. Uruka's lecture was interrupted by a brisk knock at the classroom's door. Come in, he called hesitantly. The door opened to reveal a familiar redhead looking embarrassed. Mr. Uzumaki. Hi, Cousin Ken. Naruto shouted from the back of the room. Are you teaching here now? Naruto, do not yell in my classroom. Haruka thundered. Ken chuckled nervously. No, Naruto. I just need to borrow instructor Haruka for a moment. Ken looked at him with a pleading expression, one that brought Naruto himself to mind. Haruka sighed and appointed Sakura Haruno to keep an eye on the class before stepping into the hall. What can I help you with, Ken? He asked. Ken scratched the back of his head before answering. Firstly, I apologize for interrupting your class. But I don't have much time. Time for what? The Hokage has assigned an escort mission to my team. Which means I'll be gone for at least a week. And I was wondering if, maybe, you could keep an eye on Naruto for the time. Haruka raised an eyebrow at that. You want me to babysit one of my students? Ken sighed through his teeth. Essentially, yes. I know it's sudden, but I can't think of anyone else I can trust with him. You, at least, seem to honestly care about him. Haruka looked down as he thought it over. On one hand, Naruto had been fine on his own for all of his life before Ken showed up, and he really didn't need a child running around after class. On the other, it was Naruto. All to it, he finally said. Ken sighed with relief. Thank you, Haruka. I'll happily pay you when I get back, of course. Haruka shook his head with a smile. That's not necessary. I'm just looking out for a student. Ken chuckled and pulled a roll of bills from his pocket. Well, I insist you at least let me pay for Naruto's care. And I insist you use our home. Haruka was about to refuse when he caught the look in Ken's eyes. The last part wasn't a polite offer, it was a demand. Okay. Good, Ken said. Naruto has a key to get past the security seals inside the house. The doors stay closed and locked when not in use and do not, under any circumstances, let someone in. Is that clear? Haruka felt he should be affronted that this genin was making demands of him during a favor, but the intense way he was talking made him more worried than anything. Ken, is everything alright? The Uzumaki tensed for a moment. Let's just say that letting you into that house is a gesture of immense good faith. There's things in there that people would pay through the nose, among other things, to get their hands on. Haruka processed that for a moment before nodding resolutely. You'll find the house exactly as you left it, he promised. Ken smiled tightly and nodded in turn and handed the roll of bills to Haruka before departing with last-minute thanks. As he left, Haruka noted to himself to do a little research on the Uzumaki clan. What on earth could be in that house that was as valuable as Ken had implied? In less than the given half hour, Team Talk was mobilized, packed, and passing through Konoha's western gate for Tanzaku town, jumping in the trees when they could. Aoba, as the ranking officer and therefore voted as mission leader, estimated that they would arrive at the town by early evening at their relatively leisurely pace, an estimation that proved spot on. As the sun began reached the midway point between noon and the horizon and they entered the town. Ken, now wearing a transformation seal like the one he'd had when he'd first entered Konoha to hide his fair skin and Uzumaki red hair, tensed up at the number of people in such a small space. The town was even more populated than the Leaf Village and covered far less area. People seemed to be packed onto the sidewalks like sardines, children running in the streets when there weren't carriages or carts making their way through. He began to get twitchy as years of conditioning to avoid crowds and remain out of the public eye prodded him to do something about it. He finally broke out of his trance when Tomoko took hold of the headband around his neck from behind to halt his pace. He'd almost taken a wrong turn, too distracted with trying to keep everyone here in his line of sight to keep his focus on his teammates. You know, the ones who actually had the client's location. Ken, are you alright? She asked, her voice pitched high over the clamor of the crowd. I'll be fine, he shouted back. Which was true, he'd be fine once they were off the streets. Let's just find a place to stay. After a bit of searching, the trio found an inn that struck a good balance of cleanliness, affordability, and the all-too-necessary vacancy. Tomoko, showing a surprising penchant for haggling, was able to barter a good deal on a pair of adjoining rooms, one for Tomoko, and one for Aoba and Ken to share. They took the keys and climbed the rickety staircase to the rooms, Ken passing them each a scroll he had sealed their gear and provisions into before leaving the village. Aoba unsealed his gear and began gathering a change of clothes for the morning when the crinkling of paper caught his attention. He turned to find Ken placing ceiling tags all over the walls and on the room's small window. He could only stare as the Uzumaki continued his work, the movements so practiced as to seem almost ritualistic, finally finishing with a trio of tags on the door. With that done, Ken turned and froze in the wake of Aoba's shaded stare. After a few moments of awkward silence, "Do you ever take those shades off?" "Even at night," Aoba snorted with a grin. "No. If I ever did, no one would recognize me." Which is exactly the point. His faint grin faded and he gestured to the room. "What is all this?" "Habit, I suppose," Ken replied, clearly dodging the question. "Habit," Aoba pressed. He was aware that paranoia could save a shinobi, but placing over a dozen ceiling tags in a rented room seemed a little close to overkill. "I'll take them down before we leave." "It won't take a minute," Ken added sharply. Aoba decided to drop the subject, at least for now. He too had seen how Ken reacted to the close crowds, lights, and noises of a town built on tourism and gambling. He decided to give the man some slack on what was his first escort mission, a fact he had divulged during one of their brief bits of chatter on the way here. A knock at the door diffused the tension in the room. "Guys," Tomoko said through the door, "I'm heading down to the dining room for a bite. Don't kill each other while I'm gone." The words were playful, but neither man could ignore how closely apt they were. "Hungry?" Ken asked. "Starving," Aoba replied quickly. And both ninjas rose and followed Tomoko downstairs. "Ah, Naruto. Welcome back, my boy," Teuchi said warmly. "And Instructor Iruka, always a pleasure, of course." Naruto grinned widely back while Iruka just smiled. "The usual please, Mr. Teuchi," he said. Teuchi nodded and returned to the kitchen of the stand, leaving the front open for Ayame to greet their favorite customer and his instructor. "Hello, Naruto." "Good evening, Iruka," Ayame smiled. "We haven't seen you around as much, Naruto." "Everything okay?" "Oh yeah," Naruto realized, "I guess I haven't been back since I met my cousin." "Cousin?" Ayame asked with genuine surprise. She had many fond memories of the energetic and rambunctious Kushina Uzumaki from before the Nine Tails attack that had claimed the woman's life. Memories she was sad to have to keep to herself by order of the Hokage. "Who is that?" Naruto opened his mouth to answer, then thought of something better. "Do you remember a guy who came in and talked to me last time I was here? The one who reheated my ramen and said your dad's was the best ever." Ayame tapped her chin in thought, a little over the top for Naruto's benefit. "I remember a polite man with red hair," she admitted. "That's him. We met by total accident before we realized we were cousins. Ken's an Uzumaki, just like me. And just like my mom." Ayame's eyes went wide at the revelation that Naruto knew about his mother. Did this mean he knew about his father? She bit down on the question just before it could leak from her tongue, and good thing she did with their next customer. "Naruto, boy," Lord Hiruzen said with a warm smile, setting his ceremonial hat down on the seat on Naruto's other side, "I hope you're not getting into mischief with your cousin away." Naruto pouted a bit before answering. "Nope. Instructor Iruka's looking after me, and between him and cousin Ken's instructions, I really can't afford to. Ken threatened to cut off my training if I did anything too dumb." Hiruzen couldn't hide a chuckle at that. For any other academy student, holding off training would be considered a reward rather than a punishment. It seemed Naruto had the same approach to training as his parents: dive into it until you can handle no more for the day. Befitting an Uzumaki. "And how is training going, anyway?" "Awesome. I mean, except for the meditation stuff, I hate that. And the chakra control stuff, it's so boring. But he's teaching me Uzumaki-style fighting, and he promised that he'd start teaching me ninjutsu when he says my chakra stuff is good enough." Hiruzen listened with half an ear as he accepted a bowl of his usual from Ayame and began eating. He glanced across Naruto and caught Iruka's eye, who shrugged with noodles hanging from his lips. As Hiruzen dug into his own meal, he couldn't help but be pleased that Naruto was being taught the fundamentals so early. "Has he taught you anything else?" Hiruzen asked. "Yeah, he told me about how we're descended from an old wise guy, the first ninja. And that gives us a chance to get really strong with extra hard work. He also mentioned how our old village isn't around anymore, but he won't tell me more about that." Naruto scratched his head as he tried to remember more. "I dunno. A lot of the stuff he says just kinda goes over my head and he has to dumb it down a bit. Iruka chuckled. Don't worry about that too much, Naruto. Yes, knowledge is important, but you've just got talents in different areas. True, you'll need to work extra hard in the classroom, but you can pick up physical skills way faster than most. Even faster than Sasuke. Naruto asked excitedly. Does it matter? What's important is that you pick them up well. Naruto wilted a bit at the response, knowing full well that it was grown-up talk for, no, not faster than Sasuke. What made that jerk so quick on the uptake, anyway? I believe what Iruka is trying to say, Naruto, here isn't supplied, is that you should focus on honing your own skills. Do that and the strength will follow. Don't compare yourself to others quite yet, as you're all still in the beginning of your training. Just work on your own skills and you'll rise to great heights. Exactly. Thank you, Lord Hokage, Iruka said. You are quite welcome. Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me, he said, leaving his empty bowl with his payment and a generous tip. I must sadly get back to work. He replaced his ceremonial hat and left with just a wave to Naruto. The boy waved back with a grin before more pensively returning to his third bowl. Don't compare your work to others, he repeated. Maybe Iruka and the Hokage were right. His rivalry with Sasuke made him want to beat him at everything, but maybe that wasn't the way to go. Oh yeah, he'd definitely rise up to outclass that jerk, but maybe it was time to figure out what he could do better. And he was certain Cousin Ken could help him figure that out when he got back. As promised, Ken had cleaned up the room with time to spare for the team to meet the clients by dawn. Team Talk arrived at the rendezvous to find the merchant employees of the caravans finishing their preparations. Upon their arrival, a man and a woman dressed in fine robes approached to meet them. Ah, the Leaf Shinobi. Right on time. The man introduced himself and his wife as Itsuki and Sana of the Aoki family of wine merchants who had taken it upon themselves to travel across the various nations and buy up local wines for some specialty shops in the land of cliffs. And you fear that your wines will be targeted? Aoba asked. It never hurts to be careful, the lady replied. Anyone from shrewd competitors to any number of collectors could want our stock, after all. Your reasons are your own, Tomoko said with a grin. We'll just make sure nothing happens. That is a relief, the husband sighed. We should be ready to go, but first, he turned and cupped his hands, Kato. Come here. The door of the rearmost caravan opened to reveal a young man in his late teens in a suit that was clearly designed to appear uncaringly disheveled. He was a handsome man, but the haughty sneer on his lips, now twisted with displeasure, toned down the effect. His sneer only deepened at the sight of Team Talk. Ah, the Leaf rabble. Father, I still don't see why we couldn't be bothered with our own hired hands. As he spoke, his gaze alighted onto Tomoko, and his eyebrows rose. Then again, perhaps there are some advantages, he smirked and strode up into her personal space. Good morning, miss. What might your name be? Tomoko's gaze was as deadpan as could be as she lazily crossed her arms. Does it really matter? She asked. Ah, a girl with her priorities straight, Kato grinned. Care to join me in the caravan? I'm sure I could make your task a little less tiresome. Or perhaps more so in the best of ways. Sana gasped at her son's words while Itsuki groaned in embarrassment. Hard pass, rich boy, Tomoko replied. I doubt you could keep up with a shinobi. With that, she flipped her short hair and strode away to speak with some of the merchant's workers. I like a girl who plays hard to get, Kato smirked. He glanced at Aoba and Ken and his grin disappeared into bored apathy. Don't you two have work to do? With that, he strode away with a carefully cultivated swagger. Please excuse my son, Itsuki said. He's an only child. I'm sure you know how they can be. I was an only child, Ken replied testily, raised by my grandfather after my home was razed to the ground. Aoba lowered his brows at Ken in what passed for a scowl from behind his shades. The message was clear, do not insult the clients. But that's neither here nor there, Ken recovered. How about I do some work on reinforcing your caravans with ninja sealwork? The Aokas took the silent apology with surprising grace and led him to the caravan that housed their property. Ken left behind a shadow clone to discuss guard strategies with his team, and Aoba took the lead to gather Tomoko and begin planning. Within 15 minutes, the short train was ready, Ken's pre-prepared sealwork already applied, and the mission was underway. As the train left Tanzaku town behind, a figure hidden in the trees surrounding the town a distance from the road watched through a spyglass. The figure scribbled a message and attached it to the foot of a carrier pigeon, then tossed the bird into the air. The bird circled a few times to get its bearings before flying northward. The figure watched it go before glancing at the caravans one last time. With a nod, they bolted through the trees with remarkable speed. It was time to start their operation. And no nameless Konoha ninja were going to stop them. Spirals hidden in the leaves by Mr. Spinner. Chapter 8. Aren't the leaves lovely today? Neither Aoba nor Ken seemed to react to the news, at least not externally. But the innocuous phrase was actually a code they had set up at the beginning of the mission proper, one that meant Tomoko had sensed something in the trees. They seemed particularly vibrant around here, she continued, the predetermined phrase meaning any chakra signatures she'd sensed were far larger than anyone untrained in the use of chakra. None of the three showed any sign of their suspicion, but they all internally tensed and prepared for a sneak attack. Nothing happened for several minutes, until they reached a bend in the road that hugged the side of a river. Tomoko's eyes widened a moment before the water of the river rose up in a massive wave and crashed upon the caravan train, swallowing up the cries of the Aoki family and their half-dozen employees. Geez, fool, I think we went a little overboard, huh? Two figures dressed in linen shirts and baggy pants held up by sashes rode forward on small waves from further upstream. Both bore prominent sky blue bandanas over their hair, with the kanji for tsunami positioned over their forehead. Before the second figure could answer, the water drained away to reveal three domes of rock that had protected the caravans. The dome's tops exploded to reveal three prepared shinobi. In perfect sync, Aoba and Tomoko each unsealed a Fuma shuriken and hurled them at their targets, while Ken tossed a handful of kunai. The rogue ninja dodged the projectiles and landed back on the water. Missed, the second one taunted. So? Tomoko asked, weaving hand seals. Fire release, majestic flame technique. With a deep breath, Tomoko expelled the chakra needed in her belly into a cone of widening flames that arced down like the spray from a fire hose. The ninja split up to avoid the flames, which settled on the surface of the water and continued to burn, like ignited oil. Tomoko kept up the technique and turned her head to fire it upriver, igniting the water that would slowly move downstream and forcing the enemy nin to fight on land. No sooner had the two landed than Aoba finished his own seals and slammed his bloodied hand upon the ground, summoning a flock of crows that darted at the newcomers. The pair of ninja cried out in surprise as the birds viciously attacked them, scratching and pecking at any exposed flesh that they could. Team Talk hardly had time to enjoy the satisfaction of a well-executed tactic before one of the earthen domes protecting the caravan burst and crumbled apart, accompanied by a faint scream of pain and surprise. Another ninja in a tsunami bandana lay some distance away from the unharmed caravan, his body smoking and twitching while the caravan glowed with lines of seal script and arcs of electricity. I gotta thank Yama for giving me that idea, Ken smiled. As he'd promised, he'd fortified the caravans with defensive seals, but he'd added an extra twist. He'd infused the seals with lightning chakra so that when they were triggered, the seals would release the lightning in a protective coating. Something he'd worked on in his spare time after his spar with the monkey. Unsealing their various weapons, Aoba and Tomoko went to engage the first two enemies, who had used the river water to blast away Aoba's crows, while Ken went to check the third one. Both ninjas, now covered with scratches and clearly enraged, produced a kusari fundo, lengths of chain with weights on each end, and began to twirl them before engaging the leaf ninjas. One swung his chain at Tomoko, who held up her naginata to let the chain wrap around the shaft and tug to jerk her opponent off balance. She then stepped on the chain to trap it and expertly unwound her spear shaft before swinging the blade in a horizontal swipe. The enemy nin jumped over the blade, which left him unable to dodge Tomoko's follow-up of a two-handed upward swing of the shaft that cracked against his shins. She grinned at the nin's howl of pain and kicked him away before re-engaging. Aoba, on his part, decided to test his opponent out before attacking outright. He bobbed and wove to avoid the lashes from his opponent's weighted chain that he was using as a whip. After several dodges, he released a sharp whistle, which called his crows back into the fray. With them distracting the nin, who started waving his Kusari Fundo to try and get rid of them. Aoba dove in with his kunai and slashed his opponent's flailing wrist, forcing him to drop the chain. A hard jab to the chin put the nin out like a light. After securely tying up his downed opponent, Aoba turned to find Tomoko delivering a powerful uppercut to her own enemy's jaw. She checked his pulse to find him still alive and trussed him up as well, smirking at Aoba in triumph. Ken chose that moment to arrive with his black wakizashi, a disappointed frown on his lips. Damn, I was hoping to get a few swings in, he sighed. Was the third guy dead? Tomoko asked. Ken nodded solemnly. Well then, perhaps we should investigate these two, Aoba noted. He knelt before the nin he had beaten and went through a combination of seals before removing the man's bandana and placing his palm on his forehead. Ken watched closely, eager to see the technique Aoba knew to scan memories while Tomoko expanded her chakra senses in case of an ambush. What no one expected was for a line of glowing sealing script to flare up along the nin's forehead. Aoba grunted and cringed as his mind transmission picked up psychic feedback, jerking his hand away. But rather than fade away or retract, the seal script flared brighter. The man awoke with a start and a pained scream before coughing up blood and collapsing, dead as a post. Not a second later, the same happened to his partner. Well, that was weird, Tomoko noted. Ken moved in and examined the dead nin, catching only a glimpse of the script before it finally faded away. He hissed in frustration, having picked up nothing useful, at least not from the script. Tomoko, is the area clear? Ken asked. Tomoko formed a half seal and focused to expand her sensory radius. After a few moments, she released a pent-up breath and nodded. Yep, no chakra signatures within 500 yards except for the client's. Good, Ken said, picking up a discarded bandana and examining it. Because we need to have a word with them about these guys. Further up the road, well beyond Tomoko's sensory range, a shadowy figure carefully suppressed their chakra from detection as they lowered the spyglass they'd used to examine the fight. They scoffed and shook their head. The loss of those men was nothing major, they'd been non-member cannon fodder who'd been a little good with water. But the intel they'd gleaned for the figure could go a long way in acquiring their objective. With that decision, the figure bound up the road to rejoin their real team. They'd hit soon, after the paranoia from a coming attack had worn them down a bit. They're called Rappa Nin, Ken began. After smoothing the road with Earth Release, Team Talk had directed the caravan to keep moving until dark, their senses taut for any more surprises. Thankfully, nothing had happened. They'd circled the wagons as they had the past 4 nights, much longer than expected as the clients had decided to visit a village near the border with the Land of Rain to pick up a rare vintage. Fed by the wet landscape, and Ken set up a perimeter of shadow clones to keep everyone at ease. With the camp set up for the night, he'd gathered the Aoki family to discuss the situation. Ruffian ninjas? Tomoko asked. I've never heard of them. That's because they actively avoid the attention of the great nations, Ken explained, eyes on the bandana from earlier he held in his hand. They're groups of low-level missing nin that band together after deserting, usually under the leadership of a higher-level missing nin. They avoid any countries where members are originally from and prey on the outskirts of the smaller nations. They usually act as mercenaries, but sometimes they get into organized crime as enforcers. That makes sense, the low-level thing, Aoba commented. Those guys back there were about our age but didn't seem like they could have passed the Chunin exams. I'm guessing you've had some run-ins with these types before. I have, Ken affirmed. I have 3 B-ranked missions under my belt, and all of them were to hunt down gangs of Rappa Nin who had gotten too bold for the local government's liking. None of them were more skilled than an average Chunin, but that made them too much for non-shinobi law enforcement to handle. Especially with smaller nations having so few of their own ninjas to spare. Wait, so why don't the smaller nations ask for help from the Great Five? Or even hire us to handle the problem? Tomoko asked. To save face, Aoba deduced. It's one thing for private clients to hire foreign ninjas, that happens all the time. But it's a severe sign of weakness for a small government to admit they can't handle their own affairs. It would be like hanging a fluorescent sign saying, "Come take me over, I'm easy pickings." Pretty much, Ken nodded. And one of these ninja gangs has targeted our stock. Etsuki asked. I swear we didn't expect ninja interference. It's fine, Tomoko assured them. I mean, your fee will go up to AB rank price, but we've handled the threat. So why should we pay more? Kato spat, his face red. You admitted they were barely a challenge and that they're dead now. So the ninja threat is over. For now, Ken amended. These gangs usually number in the lower dozens. The ones from earlier were probably no-talent dummies used to gauge our abilities. They'll be back with the real deal soon enough, probably before we get to the border. Kato simply flipped Ken off before stomping to his family's wagon. So what would you recommend we do? Sana asked. If Ken's analysis is correct, they will be waiting for us to stumble into another ambush, Aoba reasoned. They'll most likely be watching all of the roads that cross the border, so an alternate route wouldn't do any good. And we can't move too fast or else threaten your wares. The couple nodded in agreement with that last part. I would suggest we simply go on as we have been. If we can't avoid these Rappa Nin, then we can only fight them. Tomko, will Yama be willing to help us? Tomoko smiled and nodded. Then with the seals protecting the caravans, we should be able to keep them at bay, at least until we can get to the border and meet up with the Taki Nin for backup. The Aokas thought it over and nodded in turn. We will also see about further cushioning the wares, just in case it comes down to fleeing, Itsuki said. Sounds good, Tomoko chirped. I'll take the first watch with Yama. Ken, you take the second with your clones, and Aoba can work the last with his crows. Aoba nodded taciturnly. I agree. Everyone else, get some rest. The next few days are going to be rough. With that, the merchants and their workers returned to their caravans while the ninjas set up their tents. As Tomoko hopped into a tree to summon Yama and keep an eye out, Aoba approached Ken. Ken, if I may have a word. The redhead turned brunette only nodded. You claimed that these Rappa Nin groups avoid the great nations with fervor. If that is the case, this group must have a great motivation for whatever they want. Far too much for a wine collection, no matter how diverse. You think there's something the clients haven't told us about? Ken asked. The elder Aokas are clean, Aoba said, relying on his famed intuition. But something about the boy rubs me the wrong way, especially with how he exploded earlier. It seemed too calculated, fake. Whatever is happening, I think he is somehow involved. What will you do? Ken asked. For now, just as I said. We keep going until we finish the mission. I have a feeling that whatever he is hiding will reveal itself soon enough. With that, he left Ken to rest up for his own watch. As Ken climbed into his tent to do the same, he sighed heavily. Why couldn't C ranks be uncomplicated, just once? Reporting in, Sensei. Hiruzen smirked and tapped his pipe as he looked back to find his only on-duty student sitting in the curve of his office window. Jiraiya shrugged and hopped down to take his place before his teacher and commander. Welcome home, Jiraiya. I wasn't expecting you for a few more weeks, Hiruzen noted. I found a gap in my appointments, Jiraiya explained, referring to his frequent meetings with the informants that made up his international spy network. Said network required constant tending for him to be up to date on the events of the shinobi world, and it was the main reason he had been unable to take care of little Naruto. And since the kid's birthday is coming up, I thought I should be here to make sure things don't get out of hand. While it was true that no villager had ever physically harmed the young Uzumaki, the only child of Jiraiya's favorite student, there had been a few close calls with those with deep grudges against the fox and 1 or 3 too many bowls of sake. But Jiraiya had made a point to make sure his semi-annual scheduled reports to Konoha during the festival to make sure nothing unfortunate happened. At least to the boy. As it turns out, that may not be as large a problem as in previous years, Hiruzen commented lightly, filling his pipe back up and working on some of his paperwork with half a mind. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up under his oil headband. Have the people seriously started to accept him? That would be amazing. And, frankly, a complete turnaround from last year. No, though there has been a bit of progress on that front. I recently declassified Naruto's status. I told you that law was a bad idea, Jiraiya smirked. And he had. Every single time he'd reported in for the last 8 years. That you did, but that isn't the most impressive piece of news. Naruto now has a most devoted caretaker. The third paused, secretly savoring a bit of theatrics. A blood caretaker. Jiraiya stepped back as if he'd been slapped. A family member. Minato's family, at least those that hadn't been killed in the fox's rampage, had moved away after he died facing the fox. Unable to stay in a village with such horrific memories of the loss of their pride and joy, utterly unaware that Naruto was their family. So if it hadn't been a Namikaze. And Uzumaki is here in the village? Jiraiya asked, practically shouting. Yes, Hiruzen smiled, both at the idea and at the look on his student's face. Young Ken arrived here a few weeks ago after wandering his entire life with a recently passed relative. He came here with little hope of family and I introduced them. They are now the shared future of a once powerful clan. There were several moments of silence as Jiraiya tried to wrap his head around this revelation. Jiraiya, Hiruzen prompted, having an inkling of the lines Jiraiya's thoughts were roaming along. Best to help him along. I would have thought you'd be pleased. Jiraiya blinked rapidly as if coming out of a trance. Oh, I am, sensei. Excited. Very excited. Naruto has someone that will care for him. Hiruzen lifted an eyebrow at the faint pause in Jiraiya's words. You're suspicious, he said, a statement, not a question. That's understandable. I know how much you cared for Minato. He was like the son you'd never had. And it is natural that you would be protective of his son, who is also your godson. And before you ask, yes, I am very certain that Ken is in Uzumaki. Several blood and chakra tests confirmed as much. And he has taken good care of the boy in the weeks since. Jiraiya let out a breath, that part of his concerns abated. The Uzumaki as a whole had treasured family with little regard for distance in relation. No matter how far they were related, a genuine Uzumaki would care for Naruto as a true clansman, or cousin. But that doesn't mean that Naruto wouldn't care to meet his godfather, Hiruzen pointed out. In truth, he'd been supportive of the notion of Jiraiya taking responsibility for Naruto. Of course, that would have meant relocating permanently to the village, as the Jonin Council would never have approved letting the new Jinchuriki leave the village for so long. No matter how powerful Jiraiya was. And staying for good would mean the dissolution of Jiraiya's spy network, an invaluable resource that had taken years to cultivate. I'm no good with kids, sensei, Jiraiya deflected, as he had every time Hiruzen brought up him meeting Naruto. Maybe in a couple more years. He crossed his arms as he thought a bit. Though I would like to meet this Ken fellow. Maybe give him some tips on training. He is training Naruto, right? Jiraiya had made his opinion on the current state of the academy clear on several occasions, citing that it had severely decayed since his own tenure and the kids were capable of much more. Which was a rather bold statement from someone who was no good with kids. He is training Naruto, in the basics of all things, Hiruzen said with a smile. The professor was a firm believer in the old phrases, basics are for battle, and a strong foundation allows for a stronger house. One only had to look at the man before him to see the fruits of such a philosophy. But I'm sure he would welcome some insight from one of the Sani. Wonderful. So when can I meet him? Hiruzen explained about Ken's escort mission, one that would last a few more days according to Yamashiro's nightly messages delivered by Crow. Which meant Jiraiya would have to stay in the village for a bit longer if he wanted to meet him. Fine, I'll roam the outlying towns and tap some of my sources for local shenanigans. Now, as for what I've heard recently. Tomoko kept her breathing even in her focus on her hearing and chakra senses, carefully open to any signs of a night attack. She trusted her teammates' conclusions that these Rappa-nin would wait to attack, but it was always possible for them to try and blindside them while the group was presumably still recovering. Besides, bandits might be roaming the woods, and they'd be just as much of a nuisance as Rappa-nin. To her back was Yama, who was also listening for intruders. With the threat of these ruffians, he'd been more than willing to aid his summoner. He breathed deeply to catch any trace of an enemy's scent, and smirked at a familiar one drawing nearer. I believe that is my cue, Yama rumbled. Good night, little one. With that, Yama disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving Tomoko surprised at his sudden departure. Surprise that rapidly turned into exasperation when Ken, still in his brunette disguise even at night, landed on the other side of the client's wine caravan. Hey, how are you feeling? Ken greeted. A bit strung out, but not too tired. I usually stay up later than this anyway, she smirked. Ken rolled his eyes and conjured a shadow clone, which then conjured 9 more. With a collective salute, the clones scattered into the surrounding trees. Ken leaned back and settled onto the caravan, hands behind his head as he gazed at the moon. You know, that's really clever, Tomoko noted, drawing a leg up to wrap her arms around her shin. Conjuring one clone that has half of your chakra, then having it divide further so you keep as much as you can. Did you come up with that yourself? I dunno, Ken shrugged. I mean, I did come up with it myself, but who knows if someone else figured it out before that. He smiled. And thank you for the compliment, he added. Tomoko smiled back and cast her gaze across the trees surrounding the clearing. You're teaching me that when we get back, by the way, she said. Are you sure you can handle it? He asked. That technique is reserved for Jonin or a reason. And I haven't checked to see if you have even remotely high enough chakra levels. Checked. Tomoko glanced at him. You're a censor, too. He hadn't mentioned that. Not as such. But my clan had a technique that serves a similar function, at least at a short range. My grandfather said a few times that those who were genuine censor types could combine it with the sensory technique to vastly expand the range. And what vaunted technique is that? Tomoko asked. The mind's eye of the Kagura. By focusing our chakra we can open our mind's eye and literally see chakra, like a dojutsu. We can see its color, judge its potency, and determine its amount. Granted, it's not as overpowered as a Sharingan or Byakugan, but it really has its uses. Tomoko blinked a few times as she processed the uses of such a technique. So look at mine, she said. Ken sat up in surprise. Seriously? He asked. Sure. I mean, we're teammates, right? Tomoko reasoned. It would be a good idea for you to know my limits to the best of your ability. She repositioned herself to be sitting on her knees. Plus if you don't, I'm going to bug you about it non-stop. So it's really in your best interest, here. Ken wondered for a moment if she was joking, then grimaced and decided she definitely was not. Alright, he settled onto his knees as well, you asked for it. Ken formed a half seal and focused to open his mind's eye, taking a few moments. As the technique took effect, he took a close look at Tomoko. His breath escaped at the sight of her chakra. To his mind's eye, her chakra shone bright yellow, like the petals of a sunflower. It was somehow soothing. Ken shook his head just a bit and got back to the matter at hand. Aside from the color, her chakra was clearly very potent, and her reserves were well above average, too. Not as high as in Uzumaki, but comparable. Which meant she was fine to use the shadow clone technique as long as she kept her limits in mind. Ken let his mind's eye close and blinked his physical eyes open. I stand corrected. You've got enough chakra to split between a good 3 clones and still be ready to fight. With that, he gestured for her to come nearer and whispered the details of executing the technique. Which was remarkably simple for AB rank. Especially given her experience with the shuriken derivative. Okay, let me give it a try, she said, standing up and rubbing her hands together. She formed the unique seal for the technique and focused her chakra. Shadow clone technique. With a burst of smoke, 2 doppelgangers appeared and high-fived. Oh yeah, Tomoko cheered before clapping her hands to her mouth. It was past midnight, people were trying to sleep. No sooner had she quieted down than Tomoko fell to one knee. Tomoko? Ken asked, suddenly worried, as were her clones. They all backed off as she waved them away, dispelling her clones while she was at it. I'm okay. Just took me by surprise, the sudden drain on my chakra. She stood up and shook herself out, trying to acclimate to the sensation. Man, that was weird. No technique in her arsenal could use up chakra quite like that. Yeah, that's why it's a Jonin technique. But when they disperse, their chakra returns to you. Not to mention anything they've experienced. He smirked. Using the technique, especially in battle, requires immense self-discipline. Ken chuckled as Tomoko puffed up her cheeks in a pout. Remind me, which one of us is the ranking officer here? She asked, crossing her arms. Hopefully the one mature enough not to pull rank over a bit of teasing, Ken replied. Tomoko smiled and rolled her eyes. Well, this particular Chunin just made the decision to get some sleep for tomorrow. Don't let the camp burn down before Aoba wakes up. She pointed at him. That's an order. Yes ma'am, Ken saluted before settling down and producing a scroll of experimental seal formulae. As Tomoko hopped off the cart and made her way back to the tents, Ken's smile faded and he focused on his work, confident in his shadow clones to pick up any disturbances for the next few hours. All the while, Aoba's words about this tsunami gang being motivated, and the fleeting image of the seals that had disposed of their members, swirled in the back of his mind as he continued his work. And as he drew up diagrams and designs of sealing matrices and arrays, he couldn't help but wonder what the completion of this mission would entail. Thank you for listening to this fanfic. Hope you enjoyed the fanfic. If you did, please like and subscribe.